Okay. All right. Okay, everybody. This is Danny Matthews, your project search instructor, and I'm going to talk to you today about environmental factors. Environmental factors, what's that? Well, I'll tell you. The environmental factors are everything to do with a job, a workplace that is going to affect your success. And it's very important to think about each of these factors before you make any decisions about what type of job to pursue and whether or not to accept a job offer when that time comes. So let me go ahead and get started on our first environmental factor, and that would be location. There's a really basic way to look at location, and that is indoor versus outdoor. So think about all the differences between being indoors and outdoors. So when you're outdoors, if it's raining, you might get wet, for example, or if it's really hot outside, it might be uncomfortable, or if it's really cold, you might feel bad too. Whereas if you're indoors, usually there's what we call climate control, meaning that there's air conditioning so that it won't get too hot, or some type of heating so that it doesn't get too cold. And typically there'll be a roof over your head so you won't get rained on or snowed on or anything else. So you have to think about where the work is going to be done in any given job. Is it going to be done inside or outside? And some people don't mind being outside in the weather and actually really enjoy it. A lot of us would prefer not to have to deal with extremes of weather. And so just really think about that. Could you tolerate a job that required you to be outside most of the time and maybe in uncomfortable weather conditions? So that's our main, those are the main divisions there on your location. It's also important to think about the fact that you may have a job that's technically inside a building, but that building could be a warehouse. You may notice the picture in the middle here on my slide is a warehouse. Now, on the left is an office, uh, and then on the right side is a hospital room. Uh, but that center one, yeah, that's inside, but it may not have air conditioning in the summer. It may get very hot. It may not have much heating. So even within those two broad categories, there can be some big differences. Okay, so that's location. Let's move on to the next one, and that is the noise level. So I have two extremes here that I have photos here of. You have a library, and then you have someone using a chainsaw. So you can have these extremes at workplaces, and consider very carefully how well you can function in loud noises. How well do you do in an environment where the expectation is that you have to be very quiet? So quiet places to work could include libraries, a patient unit. Some of you have already done a lot of work on patient units during your time in Project Search. And you'll already know, of course, that you have to be quiet. You have to speak in a nice, quiet voice. You don't make any unnecessary noises. Try not to bang things around, for example. Um, And then you may have, some of you have worked in areas where you don't have to be as quiet. Now, you could end up working in an environment where there are loud noises. In fact, we have interns, former interns who work in, say, kitchens where there can be all kinds of loud noises from from equipment, from dishwashers, uh, from people having to banging around pots and pans just as part of their work. Uh, Loud noises can happen. If you're at a construction site, if you end up at a construction site, of course, then you've got things like saws um, and hammers and all kinds of things that make loud noises. So definitely consider how well you can function in an environment where there may be lots of loud noises. Is that something that you can tolerate for long periods of time, or is it something that's going to cause you to not be able to concentrate, to become agitated or frustrated or irritated? On the other hand, if you aren't really a fan of having to stay really super quiet all the time, then an environment where that's the expectation could be a problem for you too. So that's just another thing to think about. All right, let's move to the next one. Level. So there's a basic division here between it's a kind of the indoors outdoors thing again here, in a sense, because when we think of lighting, we often think of natural light as in like sunlight, moonlight, the light that comes that it just occurs naturally when you're outdoors. And then of course there's lighting that you will encounter inside buildings, that can vary quite a bit. So if you are indoors, you could end up in an environment that's quite dark or dim. Say if you got a job at a movie theater and your job was to clean the floors in between showings, for example, it's never going to be very bright in there. And in fact, if your job were to be to go inside the theater while a movie's being shown, uh, as the ushers tend to do, to check and make sure everything's okay, it's going to be very dark in that instance. Uh, it's also important to think about how you do in types of lighting that can sometimes bother people. There's a type of lighting called fluorescent lighting that some people can experience real problems with, and some people, depending on um, their eyes can be sensitive to certain types of light, certain levels of light. So think about environments you've been in that had, say, bright light or dim light. If you've ever been to a big box store, surely we all have, Walmart and maybe Home Depot and places like that, they're going to have a certain type of lighting versus a little restaurant. Their lighting's going to be quite different. Uh, so when it does come time to choose a job, it'll be yet another thing to revisit and to think about. Okay, let's move to the next one. Your work hours. Now, I don't want to shock anyone, and I hope that this doesn't bum anybody out. But here's the thing: not every job is going to provide a shift that's within the hours that you really want. Most of us, so myself included, we do best when we work in roughly sometime in the morning until, you know, afternoon or evening. So, and that's, a lot of jobs, maybe most jobs even, will occur sometime between the hours of, say, 7 a.m., 6, 7 p.m., somewhere in that time frame. Uh, However, it may turn out that you find a job that you really like, but it's a second shift, meaning that you would go in from, say, uh, 2 p.m., 3 p.m., and be there until 11 p.m., midnight. And then there's even the night shift, graveyard shift, you might call it. And those hours would be basically overnight. And so you would have your days and nights reversed in the sense that you would have to sleep during the day and work through the night. So um, there's you've really got to think about that. Now, there's this old cliche about being a morning person or not being a morning person, uh, being a night owl. Uh, so, and it's really good to think about that. When do you do your best work, or when do you feel the most awake? Uh, what what's your best sort of hours of sleep that you think you get? That kind of stuff. Now, um, I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end, but uh, so just another big one to consider. All right, let's move on. Amount of movement. So some jobs require constant walking and standing. So if you think about jobs like if you're a housekeeper, for example, and you have to go around a large facility, a hospital or an office building or something like that, and you have to do cleaning, and that's your job, and it requires that you stand a lot, walk around a lot to do those tasks. Some jobs are going to require a lot of lifting, squatting, kneeling, maybe climbing ladders. Uh, on the other hand, some jobs are going to require that you have to sit for long periods of time to do your tasks. So that's going to vary from job to job. Uh, so think about your stamina, think about whether you can tolerate standing, walking, sitting. What do you do? What do you do best? What can you tolerate the best? What do you feel is the most natural for you? So jobs are going to vary like that. You'll see in this picture here the people sitting around. Well, they had been sitting around, we presume, a conference table, and now they're up and stretching. Um, I don't know that you could technically call any of that yoga, but they seem to be approximating it. And you may, if you have a job that requires you to sit, you may find that getting up, stretching, moving around is actually a really nice thing. On the other hand, if you have a job that requires you to move around a lot and walk, and walking and standing and kneeling and lifting things and squatting and all that sort of stuff, then you may want to actually sit down on your break. Uh, anyway, there are a lot of ways to deal with the environmental factors. Just some thoughts on that. So, all right, let's go to the next one. Cleanliness and odors. So, do you mind getting dirty, muddy, or wet? If you're someone who doesn't mind that, then there are a lot of jobs out there that you might enjoy. I've got a couple of examples here on the slide. You can see some people sorting out refuse. There's the recycling, it looks like, in the middle picture there. So that's a kind of job where you're going to probably get dirty. It's probably not going to smell so great a lot of the time. If you think about it, I mean, you know, garbage is gross. And if that's the kind of thing that you're able to tolerate, doesn't bother you as much, then maybe getting involved in what we call waste management as a trash collector, or whether you're sorting recycling as these people in the picture. On the other hand, if you really aren't very good at tolerating either odors or, say, getting dirty, muddy, or that type of thing, then you may need to look elsewhere in the long run. There's also a picture here of some people washing a vehicle there. Now, the odds are they're going to get some water on them. So if you sort of shrink away from water and you pull a Wicked Witch of the West and begin to melt, if water touches you, then working at a car wash wouldn't be the place for you. On the other hand, if you really enjoy getting a car clean, polishing a car, and that whole thing, then it might be great. And then, of course, I also have a picture there on the left of an office environment where it's the expectation is everyone arrives there and they're already clean and they don't smell, and they typically the environment's going to be kept very, very clean and orderly. So if that's your thing, then you may look for some type of job that's in that type of environment, whether it's technically an office job or not. Um, so, all right, let's move on. The next category of environmental factors is work attire. So there are really, I think, broad categories here. You could maybe say four, but the examples I've shown here are business formal, business casual, and then uniform slash casual. And so I'll talk just for a moment about each of those. So business formal, this is becoming rarer and rarer anymore. You don't really see people going to work dressed in the way that people on the left are dressed as much now. Maybe a few places, banks, law offices, maybe some other places like that. But it's possible you could end up in a job that's going to require this type of attire. So it would be things like, if say a suit and tie, a dress or a skirt and a blazer, blouse, certain type of shoe, a dress shoe of some sort is going to be the expectation. They're also going to require certain grooming standards, short or trimmed facial hair, conservative or conventional hairstyles, and that type of thing. And then there's business casual, which is kind of like a relaxed version, I guess, of business formal. So you have perhaps a woven or button-down shirt, but maybe not a tie, maybe a blouse, and you could possibly be wearing cotton chino or khaki pants, and just not as formal. It's not as it's a bit more maybe comfortable for most of us. And then the final category, which is kind of a combination of things, is that uniform or casual attire. Now, there are places where there is a uniform, and of course, those of you in Project Search know what it's like to wear a uniform every day. That is one of our requirements. However, when you leave Project Search and you start working, you may or may not have a uniform to wear. I have graduates from Project Search who do wear uniforms and those who don't. So the other sort of within that category is perhaps you may work at a place where it's just casual. The dress code is casual. Now, casual, you could perhaps wear a polo shirt, maybe even a t-shirt, possibly jeans, and you just would need to make sure that you're following all the any rules that there might be around your dress code. Now, with all of these, even with, say, a job where you go, if you got involved in construction, for example, the expectation is still going to be that you'll arrive at work clean and not smelling bad, and that your clothes generally will be in decent enough shape, not, say, full of holes or stained and that type of thing. For the most part, there may be some exceptions on that. But so what I want you guys to think about is, do you feel comfortable in any particular type of attire more than any others? Is there any type of attire that bothers you for some reason? Is there any kind of attire that makes you feel, say, uncomfortable or stressed out or anything like that? Some people don't really care what they're wearing. They're more focused on the work, and they'll wear whatever they're told to wear. And other people, it doesn't, they're not quite as open about that. And some people might have some sensory issues around certain types of fabric and that kind of stuff. So we're going to revisit this at a future date and really look at what this all means for you as an individual. All right, let's go to the next one. Structure and predictability. All right, so you're going to have a work schedule probably. I've never heard of a job that didn't. However, within that schedule, or within any given job, you may have a schedule that is the same every week, week after week, year after year. So My job, for example, is mostly Monday through Friday, and then occasionally I'll have some things I have to do on the weekend, and sometimes I'll have to do things in the evening. But for the most part, I'm kind of a day shift person in my job. Uh, it's predictable in the sense that I know basically each week when I'm going to be going to work, when I'm going to come home, and that sort of stuff. Uh, Now, not all jobs are like that, of course. So I'll get into that for a second here. Um, so if you like to have the same sort of list or set of tasks to do each day, and do you like to have a schedule that stays the same? It's good to know that if you, because some jobs, they aren't like that. Some jobs you'll have different tasks that you given on any given day. um, it could change daily. You may in fact arrive at a job and thinking that you're going to be doing a certain task, and you'll arrive and they'll tell you, well, actually no, we need you to do this other thing today. So um, and so that's going to vary from job to job. So you've got to think about how well you can handle change. And are you someone who, do you have a personality that sort of amenable to getting these sorts of changes thrown at you? Do you do a whole lot better though? Are you someone who does a whole lot better if you know what's going to happen, and there's a set schedule, and you know there's a certain order of the day to the day in terms of the tasks that you're going to do each day? Uh, so uh, just as an example of a schedule that you may that or place rather where the schedule may not be quite so stable could be if you were to work at a restaurant. Most people I know who work at restaurants, they tend to especially with the days of the week they work, it seems to me that they'll from week to week they'll work different days or maybe different shifts. And so that can happen. Certain jobs, that's the nature of it. They kind of shift people around and move them around based on the needs of that particular business. So you've got to think about, before you accept a job, how dependent you are on having a predictable, stable schedule, uh, and or are you able to sort of adjust and adapt to changes? All right, let's go to the next one. Work pay. Now, I have a couple of examples here of two different types of work that would typically have different pace. And by pace, it just means how fast does the work flow. Um, so, for example, on the left, there's a picture of a restaurant. Looks pretty busy. So if you were performing tasks in that environment, it's probably going to be hopping along really fast. And the expectation is you're going to keep up with that workflow, and you're going to get your tasks done in a very short amount of time. So if you were a server, a waiter, waitress, and you had to go and take people's orders and then go back and give those orders to the kitchen, and then make sure everybody has everything they want, all the customers have what they want, what they need. And if it's busy like this restaurant in this picture, you may have could be hours in a row where you're just having to go and get tons and tons of things done in a short amount of time. On the other hand, on the other extreme, I put a picture here on the right of someone using a floor waxer or floor buffer. And that's the type of work where it might take quite a long time, but the emphasis might be more on making sure that you're paying attention to detail and doing a very thorough job. It's just the type of task that would require that. You would have to pay great, very close attention to make sure that you've done the job properly. And maybe that ends up being just about your only task for a shift is to go around doing a detailed cleaning task like that, whether it's floor polishing or some other type of task, requires a lot of detail and concentration. So uh, there's also there are jobs that involve very slow pace in that there isn't perhaps a task that's very active. So, for example, there are jobs such as security guards who work perhaps at a entry gate to a neighborhood or a country club or something like that, and there may not be that many people coming and going, and your job may require you to kind of just sit and do a lot of waiting. Sometimes that can maybe stretch for long periods of time, and so you have a very slow work pace. As a result, you may uh, you have to, so you've got to think about um, how you feel uh, about uh, both of these. And of course, a lot of jobs are going to be, mixtures. Uh, so you may have a job where there are busy periods where everyone's go, 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 and you've got to work really fast. And then there may be a slowdown where things kind of relax a little bit, and you can kind of take some time to sort of catch your breath. And so think about your own preferences as far as are you good at maybe waiting and being patient, and maybe that way that could make you suited to a job that has a slower work pace. Or do you maybe kind of get bored easily and you like to stay active, and a faster work pace may work better for you.